I'd been with the company for more than 20 years. I started as a junior engineer and worked my way up to chief structural engineer. My designs had become the backbone of our success, contributing to over 70% of the firm's long-term revenue. I'd been through thick and thin with this company. My fingerprints were on nearly every project. But everything shifted the moment Marcus walked into the room. The morning team meeting started like any other. My colleagues sat around the long table in the conference room, chatting idly before the meeting began. I was one of the first to enter, and as usual, I made my way to my seat at the head of the table. Then Marcus came in. He was wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. Perfectly sharp, a shade of blue that screamed high-end. He strode into the room with confidence, like someone who owned the place. His briefcase clicked against the floor as he set it down. And for a brief moment, he surveyed the room as if he was the judge and we were the jury. I didn't know it at the time, but this meeting would be the first of many where my expertise, my years of dedication, would be questioned. Marcus introduced himself as the new innovation consultant brought in to modernize the architecture division. He was here to help us embrace the future, he said with a slick smile that felt too rehearsed for comfort. I wasn't sure why they needed a consultant when our division was thriving, but there was no stopping the tide of change. It didn't take long for Marcus to start putting his mark on things. He slid into the seat next to mine and pulled up his laptop, clicking through slides filled with buzzwords like synergy, modularity, and visionary. I could barely suppress a frown. Then he turned to me. "Elena," he said, his voice oozing confidence, "your building models are impressive, but they feel a bit vintage. You know, like how people still hang on to old furniture that's seen better days?" I froze. My hands were still on the table, my fingers gripping the edge as I tried to mask my shock. Was he seriously calling my decades of work outdated? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could form a response, Marcus flipped the slide, revealing the words Modularity Synergy 360 in bold. "Now, this is the future," he said, pointing to the screen as if he had just unlocked the secret to immortality. "We're not just talking about buildings. We're talking about transforming how people live, work, and interact with space." I couldn't help but notice how he avoided eye contact with me. It felt like I was being left out of the conversation, like I was a relic of the past. When the meeting ended, Marcus stood up, gathering his things with a practiced swiftness. He flashed a smile that felt more like a calculation than warmth. "We're rebranding these monthly review sessions. From now on, we'll call them Vision Labs. Get ready for a revolution," he said before walking out. I stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the back of his suit, the door swinging shut behind him. My stomach twisted. A part of me wanted to protest, to remind him that this firm had thrived because of the work I'd put in, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. Marcus was the future, and I was suddenly obsolete. For the next few weeks, things grew quieter, not in the way one would expect, the kind of silence that signifies peace, but in a way that felt cold, calculated. Marcus began to schedule one-on-one meetings with every junior architect I had worked with closely for years. At first, it seemed harmless. After all, new blood in the company is always good for innovation, right? But I quickly realized what was happening. During these meetings, Marcus would subtly plant seeds of doubt, questioning the decisions I had made on past projects, challenging my methods. "It's all about embracing the future," he'd say, or "form doesn't follow fear," a phrase he repeated like some sort of mantra. His words started to creep into the conversations of my team. Slowly, I noticed how their tone shifted. Phrases like vintage, modular synergy, and streamlined design began popping up in their work and in meetings where they used to defend the plans I had laid down. I wasn't invited to the new project boards anymore. There were no discussions about approvals, no sit-ins during the planning stages. The younger team members who had once been my mentees began looking at me with a certain wariness. It wasn't overt, but I could feel the walls they were building. Then came Blueprint X. The company had launched a new internal forum, designed for architects to share ideas, critiques, and forward-thinking concepts. I assumed it would be an extension of our existing review process. But no one mentioned me when the invite went out. I found out about it by accident. A team member had forwarded a thread where Marcus was sharing commentary on my past designs. The posts were filled with critiques, some constructive, others condescending. Legacy methods, he called them, outdated. It wasn't just that my work was being dissected in public, It was the insinuation that my contributions no longer had value, that I no longer had a place here. It was then that I began to notice something different. I began paying attention to the small things, the empty chairs in meetings, the lack of responses when I asked for updates, the subtle exclusion. I wasn't just being sidelined, I was being erased. I started backing up everything I could find. I pulled all my design files from the company server, meticulously checking timestamps and change logs. I started compiling internal memos and email threads, ones that clearly documented my contributions to some of the company's most lucrative projects. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I needed to be ready. It was a quiet move, the kind of thing you do when you see the first crack in the wall, and you know something bigger is about to break, and it was about to. It was late one evening when I sat at my desk, sifting through the archives. The office was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes with the late hours of the night. I'd been organizing old documentation, files, contracts, and old designs. There was something about the orderliness of it all that calmed me, like I could find some semblance of control amidst the chaos Marcus had started to stir. As I opened another dusty file, a yellowed envelope slid out. My eyes narrowed when I saw what was inside. An old contract, one I hadn't seen in years. It was from the company's early days, before the fancy offices and expansion projects, before the years of wear and tear I'd endured in this place. Curious, I began reading through it. The language was archaic, the kind of legal jargon that used to be standard, but one phrase caught my eye. Section 11.4. I felt a jolt of recognition when I read it. In the event of termination without 90 days' notice, all original designs created by the employee shall revert to the employee, including intellectual property rights and ownership. My heart skipped a beat. This clause, buried in the fine print of an old contract, was a lifeline I'd almost forgotten about. The memories flooded back. My ex-husband, Charlie, had been the one who'd insisted on inserting that clause years ago. He'd argued it was just in case, a precaution in case things ever went south, something to protect me if my contributions were dismissed. At the time, I'd brushed it off, thinking it was a ridiculous overreaction. But now, looking at it in the cold light of the current situation, it felt like a weapon, one I could wield. I didn't waste any time. I opened my email and typed a quick message to Charlie, attaching the scanned contract. Subject: question about the clause. Charlie, I found the clause we added to my contract years ago. Can you confirm that it's still valid? Elena. I hit send and sat back, my mind racing. This could be it. This could be the game changer I needed to flip the tables on Marcus. The reply came in quickly, almost too quickly. It was like he'd been waiting for me to ask. You're sitting on a golden detonator. I smiled for the first time in days. For months, I'd been pushed aside, marginalized. Marcus had rebranded my work, my designs, as outdated and vintage. But now I had something that could shatter his world. I wasn't just Elena, the outdated architect anymore. I was the one holding the key to the company's entire design foundation. The projects, the legacy systems, the intellectual property, it could all be mine. I sat back in my chair, staring at the email. This was it. The endgame had begun. The days following Marcus's rebranding felt like a slow bleed. The shift in power was so subtle at first that I almost didn't notice the erosion of my role. But by the time I did, the changes had already become entrenched. I began to see my name disappearing from reports, gradually replaced with generic titles like senior draftsman. Where once my contributions had been highlighted, they were now hidden behind phrases like designed under previous leadership or revamped by the innovation team. It was clear. Marcus was making sure there was no trace of me left in the company's future. He wasn't content with simply sidelining me. He was actively erasing me. One of the most disheartening moments came when a project I'd spent months perfecting was suddenly fast-tracked using my blueprints. Skyaxis 3.0, Marcus called it, as if he had any claim to it at all. His team slapped a new name on the structure, stripped away the credit, and presented it like it was all their work. I bit my tongue. There was no point in arguing anymore. I was an outsider now, a relic of an era they wanted to forget. I didn't attend the next few meetings. I didn't bother to ask for updates. I stopped engaging with the new projects altogether. But that didn't mean I wasn't paying attention. I quietly backed up every single file I'd worked on over the years. Designs, change logs, internal feedback, emails, everything. The weight of the data in front of me was immense. But it felt like I was preparing for something larger, a battle, a reckoning, something. I made sure to preserve all the work I could trace back to my name. Marcus may have been erasing me from the company's narrative, but I wasn't going down without a record of my legacy. Then came the meeting where Marcus made his true feelings known. It was a staff session, one of the first under the new Vision Labs branding. Everyone was excited about the new direction, hanging on Marcus's every word. He stood in front of the room, presenting what he called the future of architecture. He clicked through his slides with flair, showcasing his vague concepts of modularity, synergy, and the like. When he finally landed on a slide titled Sky Axis 3.0, he referred to my original design as a well-meaning antique. I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept my expression neutral. I knew what he was doing. He wasn't just rebranding the work. He was rebranding the entire company's history to fit his narrative. A quiet ripple of approval moved through the room as Marcus continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. When he finished, I stood up, calmly walked to the front of the room, and stared him down. "I am the architect," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur in the room. The room went silent. Even Marcus faltered for a split second, his smile wavering as he processed my words. "I am the architect," I repeated. This, I motioned toward the projected blueprint, is my work. You can call it Sky Axis 3.0, but don't you dare pretend it's something new." Without waiting for his reply, I turned and walked out of the room. The silence that followed my departure was deafening. It was a Friday when Marcus called. A Zoom meeting invitation popped up on my screen, unannounced and unexpected. I hesitated for only a moment before clicking to join. The room was his usual clean-cut self, cool, collected, smug. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Elena," he began, his voice smooth like velvet, "I wanted to inform you of a decision that's been made. After much review, we've decided to reposition you within the company." Reposition. The word caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. My eyes narrowed slightly as he continued, his hands steepled in front of him as if delivering an executive address. "We're taking the company in a new direction," he went on, his tone never faltering. "Your work, while foundational, no longer aligns with where we're going. As such, we'll be transitioning your role into a more supportive capacity. Your designs will now be company property, as per your contract, and you'll be relieved of your duties as chief structural engineer. Your last day will be within the next week." I didn't say a word. I just sat there, absorbing the sting of his words, the dismissiveness of his tone. He was trying to sound kind, even concerned, but all I could hear was the quiet malice behind every syllable. I had built this company, and now I was being discarded like yesterday's news. The silence stretched between us for a moment, my mind racing, searching for the right words, but I came up empty. There was nothing I could say to this man, to this company, that would matter anymore. Not when they had already made up their mind. I nodded, barely. "Understood." Without another word, I logged off. The click of the meeting ending echoed in the empty room like a death knell. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the betrayal sink in. I stood up slowly, the cool air of the office hitting my skin. I needed to clear my head. Walking out the door, I kept my pace slow, deliberate. I made my way around the block, letting the brisk air cut through the haze in my mind. The city was alive with the usual Friday bustle, but all I could hear in my head was the sound of Marcus's smug delivery. His voice kept repeating, "Your designs will now be company property." By the time I returned home, I felt a strange sense of calm, but the fire inside me was starting to burn hot. I sat at my desk, my fingers moving automatically as I opened the laptop. The clause. I pulled it up again, the clause I had forgotten about, the one that gave me the rights to all of my designs if I was terminated without proper notice. I hadn't thought about it in years, but now it felt like a shield I could wield. I printed it out, watching the paper slowly slide out of the printer. As I held the document, I could almost feel the weight of everything shifting. I quickly wrote an email to my lawyer, attaching the document. Subject, it's time. Charlie, I'm invoking the clause. I need you to prepare a cease and desist letter, effective immediately. I'm also attaching the blueprints, timestamps, and internal memos showing the unauthorized use of my designs. It's time to move forward with legal action. Elena, I hit send, the weight of the words settling heavily in my chest. For the first time in months, I had a plan, a real plan. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. Monday morning arrived like a storm, sharp and relentless. The world outside my window seemed oblivious, bathed in sunlight. But inside the company, the ripple effect of my cease and desist letter had already begun. As soon as I logged into my email, I saw it, a notification from my lawyer, Charlie. It was the confirmation that the letter had been sent to the company. The cease and desist was official. The company now had a week to stop using my intellectual property or face legal consequences. But it wasn't just the cease and desist that hit them like a ton of bricks. Charlie had also included an invoice for the unauthorized use of my blueprints. And it wasn't a small number. A few million, actually. Nearly $5 million to be exact, for the designs they had shamelessly rebranded as Marcus's vision. The paperwork I had gathered, all the timestamps and changelogs, proved that Marcus's innovations were nothing more than repackaged versions of my work. The emails, the feedback notes, the original blueprints, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The proof was undeniable. I could already picture Marcus's face when he saw it. I could almost hear the smugness draining from his voice as the realization hit him. He had been playing a dangerous game, assuming that his position would shield him from consequences, but he had underestimated me. As I scrolled through my inbox, I saw that Marcus had already posted his latest motivational mantra in Blueprint X. Vision is action. He was trying to rally the troops to convince them that the relaunch was still a forward-thinking success. But I knew better. It was the beginning of the end for him. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my bones, and smiled. I wasn't in the boardroom anymore, where I'd been silenced. I wasn't a figurehead anymore. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the company was about to find out that they had bitten off more than they could chew. I sat back in my chair and watched as the company's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Investors would soon start asking questions. The executives would have no choice but to scramble for answers. The storm I had unleashed was just getting started. The relaunch was set for 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, Marcus's way of ensuring there would be minimal disruption. He must have assumed I wouldn't be paying attention. He must have thought I was out of the game completely, that I would just watch from the sidelines as he and his team pushed the new vision forward. But he was wrong. I wasn't done yet. I had spent weeks preparing. The night before the launch, I didn't sleep a wink. Instead, I pored over the updated designs and the adjustments they'd made to the blueprints. It was a careful process, one that required precision, and I was painfully aware of every detail Marcus had overlooked. As I combed through the changes, I noticed the glaring flaws. Marcus had stripped away safety protocols I had specifically designed into the original plans, protocols that were essential for the structural integrity of the building. Without them, the safety margins were compromised. Critical elements were weakened, vulnerable to failure. I hadn't missed them. He had. By the time the relaunch occurred at 3 a.m., I already knew that disaster was looming. I had everything in place, the evidence, the documentation, the audit trails, and I knew that it wouldn't take long for the problems to surface. 2 days later, the cracks began to show. A high-profile client, one we'd worked with for years, halted a multi-million-dollar contract. They cited design safety concerns, specifically pointing to the missing safety protocols. Investors started calling in, demanding answers. How could this happen? Where had the process gone wrong? Internally, the issue started to snowball. Someone leaked the documents to a construction regulation blog, and the article went viral within hours. The post detailed the architectural flaws, comparing the new design to my original work and highlighting the stripped-down safety features. It didn't take long for the board to catch wind of the growing scandal. Marcus went silent. During meetings, his camera was always off, his voice barely audible when he did speak. The confidence that had once oozed from him had evaporated, replaced with a nervous energy that no one could ignore. I knew what he was doing. He was scrambling, trying to cover his tracks, but the damage was already done. And the board, once enamored with his so-called vision, began to question everything. They started probing the design origins. The questions about missing safety protocols grew louder. How could such a massive oversight have happened? They were demanding answers, but Marcus had none to give. I could hear the whispers from the sidelines, murmurs of my name, suggestions that the board might come back to me for a solution. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. It was only a matter of time before the weight of my cease and desist letter caught up with Marcus. The company's management was used to smooth sailing, to moving from one flashy innovation to the next. They hadn't expected a storm, a legal one no less, to tear through their neatly curated plans. As the week wore on, the phone calls started. Investors who had once been sold on Marcus's new vision were now raising concerns. Questions were asked about the design flaws that had been exposed, particularly regarding the critical safety protocols I had put in place and which Marcus had stripped out. They'd begun scrutinizing every move made during the relaunch, demanding clarification. Then came the leaked documents. They appeared on a construction regulation blog, detailing the issues with the project's safety margins. The story spread quickly, drawing attention from industry professionals and investors alike. The blog post, backed with concrete evidence and comparisons to my original designs, made it clear that Marcus's innovation had been nothing more than a stripped-down copy of my work, filled with dangerous oversights. By the time I walked into the office the following Monday, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel the shift as soon as I stepped into the lobby. The usual energy of the office had been replaced by a quiet unease. My phone buzzed with missed calls, emails, and messages, all demanding my immediate attention. I resisted the urge to smirk. Marcus had gone radio silent. His posts on Blueprint X stopped coming. His emails became few and far between. I knew what that meant. The board had finally taken notice. They were scrambling. Just as I had predicted, rumors began to swirl about Marcus's future. By midweek, I received a call from a vice president on the board. "Elena," the voice on the other end of the phone said, the tone more respectful than I had heard in weeks. "We've reviewed everything. Internal legal has confirmed the validity of your contract and the clause you invoked. We're in a difficult position." I didn't say anything. I already knew the direction this conversation was heading. "We wanted to know if you would be willing to consider a return in a leadership capacity," he continued. "There's a lot of chaos right now. If you're willing to step in and help smooth things over, we'd appreciate it." I had no interest in returning under the same circumstances. Marcus had already poisoned the well, and I wasn't going to be the one to clean up his mess. My silence spoke volumes, but I didn't need to waste my breath. "I'll pass," I replied simply. "I'm no longer interested in being a part of this company as it is, but you might want to reconsider Marcus's position." I could practically hear the shuffle on the other end of the line as the reality set in. Within the hour, Marcus's name began disappearing from all internal platforms. His posts were erased from Blueprint X, his permissions revoked. It was a quiet collapse, but I could feel the momentum shift. The company had finally realized the truth. They had made a colossal mistake. By Friday, a public announcement was made. The company issued a statement about a strategic realignment. Marcus's name was scrubbed from the records, and all mentions of his role disappeared like a ghost in the system. It was the company's way of attempting to save face, but they couldn't undo what had been done. As I watched the announcement come through on my phone, I smiled. Marcus had been thoroughly erased, and I was just beginning to realize the full scope of the battle I had won. I hadn't expected the call, but there it was. It was early in the morning when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I debated for a moment before answering. "Elena," the voice on the other end said, calm and measured. "This is Steve, the original investor behind the company's expansion. I wanted to reach out directly. We've been reviewing things internally, and we're aware of the challenges that have surfaced recently. After speaking with the board, we'd like to offer you full control over the design direction moving forward." My breath caught in my throat. Control. Full control. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. "I'm listening," I said, carefully choosing my words. "We know the value you bring to the company. The designs you've created, they're the foundation of everything we've done so far. We understand that Marcus's vision hasn't gone as planned, and we need someone with your expertise at the helm. We want you to come back on your terms." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. For the first time, it wasn't a fight to be seen or respected. It wasn't about defending my work. It was about reclaiming what was mine. "I'm not interested in returning as an employee," I said firmly, "but I am willing to come back as a consultant, one with full veto power over any design decisions." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Steve spoke again, this time with a quiet understanding. "That sounds like exactly what we need," he replied. "Let's make it official. We'll work with your lawyer to ensure your contract is ironclad." Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. My lawyer reviewed the terms, ensuring the contract included everything I needed to protect my interests, including IP ownership and a licensing deal that allowed me to retain control over the designs while licensing them to the company. The contract was signed with 3 executive initials, making it binding. The interim CTO tried to reach out to me, eager to introduce himself and assert his influence. When his email arrived, I simply replied with one line: "Please email me only if the matter is billable." It felt good. The power was shifting back into my hands. The company was now forced to pay me for access to the very designs they had once dismissed as obsolete. The days following the strategic realignment felt like the quiet after a storm. The company had stabilized, and I could already see the seeds of change taking root. The systems I had built, my legacy, they remained untouched, standing strong as ever, while the company scrambled to regain its footing. The app, the core of the company's operations, hummed along without a glitch. Investor confidence, which had briefly faltered, was beginning to rebound. The damage Marcus had caused was still fresh in their minds, but the focus was slowly shifting toward the future. My future. As I sat in my office, my eyes wandered over the desk. The clean lines of my work were everywhere, from the detailed blueprints stacked neatly in the corner to the quiet hum of my computer, where I still held the power to approve or reject design decisions. My licensing agreement, now a cornerstone of my return, was posted in bold, clear view on the wall. I smiled every time I passed it. The terms were ironclad. The company would pay me monthly for access to my intellectual property, and in return, I had the final say on any designs moving forward. I wasn't just a consultant. I was the one they needed to keep the wheels turning, the one they now had to pay to access their own product foundation. A message popped up on my screen, a direct message from a young junior architect. "Just realized you built everything." It was simple, but it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the buildings, the designs, or the systems. It was about the legacy I had crafted over the years, one that was far more enduring than any fleeting project Marcus had introduced. I stared at the message for a moment before typing my reply. "When you draft the rules, make sure you keep the original pencil." I smiled to myself as I hit send. The young architect was just beginning to understand what I had always known. True control doesn't come from playing the game. It comes from owning the rules. As I leaned back in my chair, I took a long, steady breath. Marcus, once the shining star of the company, had disappeared from the public eye. Rumors circulated that he had moved into consulting for non-core industries, whatever that meant. To me, it was a fitting end to his brief tenure. He was nothing more than a blip on the radar of a company that had already built its foundations, long before he came around. The office had finally returned to normal, or perhaps it had shifted into something entirely new, a place where I could steer the ship, where the legacy of my work was no longer being erased but celebrated, where my name, once left to fade into the background, now held the weight it deserved. I glanced around the room again, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. There was something calming about the stillness, the certainty that I now controlled my destiny. And the company's. The fight for my place, for my designs, was over. I had won. The blueprint for the company's future had already been drawn, and it had been mine all along.